The story I'll be reading tonight is called The Weight of It. Addie was sitting in their lone ladder-back chair, staring out their window, when he walked out of the woods with a shovel. She'd long since forgotten about the ball of yarn in her lap. This had been the second time in a month that he'd stayed out all night. When she'd heard his boots clomp down on the floor, she knew where he'd been. He fell onto their bed without even turning to recognize that she'd been out waiting on him. Addie kept gazing into the wooded hillside behind their cabin long after he'd fallen asleep. The long-leaf pines rose beyond the window, blocking the intrusion of the morning sun. Then, beyond the pines, the mountain terrain blurred into a single wooded shadow. They lived up on Clinch Mountain all of their lives. Her family had been there for the better part of 2 centuries. His had been in the area for the last half of this one. Addie knew the hillsides in this remote part of Tennessee better than most anyone. She looked out on the dew-stained path and allowed her memories to wander over the dirt that his steps had disturbed. She went past the dried-up creek bottom, through the choking brambles of mountain laurel, and onto those loose mounds of dirt and soil that rose up over the disturbed pine needles. None of them were more than 4 feet long. Addie turned to watch him sleep. She knew he'd added another mound last night. She heard him trying to calm the little boy down in the dark of yesterday's afternoon. He told the kids that he'd walked them back into the woods to help him look for his folks. That was the last she'd heard from him until the morning. He didn't even come back for dinner. Part of her figured that he'd end up doing something like this when he agreed to marry her, despite the stories around the ridge about what had happened to her last family. He couldn't help it. She understood that. It was difficult living tucked away like they were. Addie stood there and watched his chest rise and fall. She didn't blame him. She just wondered if the weight of it would catch up to him before he found her mounds of dirt and soil. Thank you.